Hello and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our global business line leader here at Intertek for our medical and laboratory division. And I am so thrilled to be joined by my colleague today, Ray Payne. Hi, Ray. How you doing?
Hey, Clarissa. Good talking to you again.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to chat with you today. So maybe to kick us off, you can tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your journey here at Intertek, and how you've gotten to be in the medical industry.
Sure, absolutely. Ray Payne. I work out of the Boxborough, Massachusetts office for Intertek. I've been with Intertek for coming up on 9 years. It'll be 9 years in a couple months. So it's been a fun journey. I got into the industry initially by selling electrical safety testing and passive component measurement equipment to medical device manufacturers. I know it's a mouthful, but that's how I got there. Where device manufacturers were looking for production line testing. So I sold that type of equipment. And then I started working my way up in the industry from test engineers all the way up to selling a full complete service. I worked with a competitor with Intertek in the past, so I got my feet wet there. And then I've joined Intertek now, supporting the medical device industry primarily. My current role, though, again, is a sales manager, so I support all verticals. But my baby, my love, my passion has always been medical. So that was my journey here. And so it's been a very, very fun journey with Intertek.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting too, because not only do you have this experience, right, working within the industry for, 10 plus years inside of Intertek and outside on kind of both sides of the spectrum, but also really unique because you get to sit in one of our largest medical facilities, right? Our largest medical center of excellence, with the largest scope of accreditations and largest scope of standards that are within their scope. So, thinking about that, what you see day to day coming into Boxborough, what are you seeing with customers that are coming in? What are some of the devices that we're seeing, some of the technology types? Things have been obviously really interesting over the past couple of years coming out of the pandemic and in this kind of new phase that we're in. So what have you been seeing just on the day to day?
Oh, sure. On the day-to-day, as you mentioned, with such a large scope here in the Boxborough facility, we have the privilege of supporting a wide range of clients, whether it be from COVID kit test of late, all the way to very complex surgical robotic systems and everything in between. And so it's very, very interesting on the wide range of products. But the thing is that no matter if it's a startup company or a Fortune 100 company, they're having the same type of issues. And so those issues that no one's probably surprised of are logistical issues from components and even staffing issues from that standpoint, meaning people either acquiring products, expanding the scope, acquiring products, or people leaving, going to different roles. And so that leaves a wide range of support services that we have. And we see the challenges that they have from top to bottom. And it's not just related to medical, but it's all types of industries. And an example of the supply chain issues, we have one laser device manufacturer, and they use a wide range of components. But some of these components that they get for semiconductor chips, they're also used in the the automotive industry as well. And I won't say who the manufacturers are, but the automotive manufacturer is dominating the semiconductor chips components. And our laser client went to the manufacturer, the supplier, and said, hey, we need more components so we can make our product. And that particular semiconductor manufacturer said, hey, I know you're a good client of ours, but this manufacturer X, auto manufacturer X, is 10 times the size, and they're on backlog. They're on backlog too, so you're going to have to wait. And so that causes problems because they can't get the components, right? And sometimes that's forcing them to meet their client demand to either source out separate components or even having to do a design change because they say, you know what, can't use that. Maybe we do something else. And so it causes a big backlog. And that's the challenge that they have. Again, the supply chain issues and then just personnel too. Because coming out of COVID, some people may have come back. Some people may have left different jobs. Some people said, you know what, I'm going to stay home and do something else. So it's a wide range of different type of things that start to compound on a lot of the challenges that these manufacturers are having.
Yeah. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about both of these things because I do think it's so interesting, right? We're in this very unique phase in the medical industry, right? Because we have so many changes that are happening right now, right? We have regulatory changes with, new requirements with MDR and IVDR. We have updates to standards for both the safety standard, for the EMC standard. We have things going on in China with, self-testing and self-acceptance of testing, right? There's so much fluidity right now and so many things are changing, but at the same time, we're also seeing on the manufacturer side, on the industry side, this, quite a great attrition, right? People leaving their jobs, moving to different companies or moving out of the industry in general, which I think has put us, in this really unique position that we haven't necessarily been in years before, right? Typically the medical industry has been a nice growth industry. You have a lot of the same people who either, have longevity at their companies or are moving within the industry from company to company. And now we're seeing that there's just so many new people who are entering the medical industry in general, working on new product development. And then you couple that with, all of the changing regulations and the changing standards. And it makes it pretty difficult, right, to know what the best path is, right? How you move forward as a med device manufacturer, how you educate yourself, right, on what's going on in the industry and, what you need to know in order to, get your products to market. So do you have any thoughts on that, right? When we're looking at, okay, I'm new to the industry or I'm new to a medical device manufacturer, trying to understand, what are my requirements? Where do I go? What should I be doing to make sure I fulfill all of the requirements of the standards as well as regulatory?
Yeah, that's a great point. And these manufacturers, they have great talent. They have very, very smart people. They focus on design. They focus on software. But the gap, as you mentioned, is the regulatory piece of that. A lot of the companies have had tenured regulatory professionals who are, some of them are retiring, some of them are moving on, and they hire new staff. They just miss the regulatory aspects of it. There was one local company back when the pandemic started, and there was the shortage of ventilators, right? And you had local universities here in the Massachusetts area. It's great for academia. And they said, you know what, we can make ventilators. We can figure this out. And they could. Literally, part of them went to Home Depot and whatnot, and they got these components and they put them together. And it's great. Listen, we made a mechanical lung. But the problem is they missed all of the regulatory requirements where it's like, hey, what about the safety? What about the efficacy? What about VOC? And so that's where a lot of people are falling short on the regulatory gap just to meet North American requirements. Then, as you mentioned, what about the European requirements? If it's an IVD device, if it's the MDR in Brazil, in China, in Japan. And there's so many nuances because even though there might be an international harmonized standard, there are those differences that you have to remember. Sometimes some of these companies, they have milestones to meet, project deadlines, right? And sometimes if you miss something so far down the road and you have to go back and change something, then all of a sudden your timelines are missed. And so those are the challenges. And so what we're trying to do is be flexible with some of the resources. How can we help facilitate? We as a company have to grow as well, right? With some of the programs that you've initiated throughout the medical division here in Intertek. And so we grow with the manufacturers to try to understand what are some of the challenges, the existing challenges and the new challenges to make sure that what they do today passes through tomorrow to make sure these products meet the market. And it's educating the new staff as well, because not just if they're new to the business, as you mentioned, the regulatory requirements are changing. So, for example, technology moves faster than regulation. That's why you have a lot of wireless and cybersecurity regulations that are new to these traditional device manufacturers as well.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point too, because we've had over these past few years when the third edition came out, right, that was a big shakeup in the industry. And we had a lot of questions and concerns and people didn't know what was going on when we moved to this risk-based standard, risk-based approach. But then we've really gotten into a groove over the last few years, right, of people becoming more experienced with risk management, understanding the requirements, understanding usability, understanding what to fill out and all of those things. But now we're entering into this new phase of, okay, let's talk about updates to the standards. Plus we have updates to the medical device regulation now, right, coming out, which is such a big change up for the whole medical industry. So there's a lot to try to, keep a finger on a pulse. And then you even go further, as you mentioned, right? We look at some of these more complex requirements when you think about biocompatibility or VOC testing or, leachables and extractables testing, as you get into some of these more complex pieces of medical equipment that then require all of those things on top of the harmonized standard testing, right? And everything else that you're doing to show that you've done your due diligence, that you've gone through the risk process and identified all those risks and things like that. So I do think it's just quite an interesting time to be in the medical industry. And I'm sure we're going to see, as we continue to move forward and as, the pandemic is ever changing, right, with what we're seeing and the job market is ever changing. And so I think we'll continue to see, new things popping up as the staff and manufacturers and everybody's kind of changing, and maybe things will settle out again, right, which will be likely probably over the next 6 months to a year, and we'll start to get back into that groove. But it has been really interesting looking at everything that's kind of hitting all at the same time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so let's talk to a little bit about the supply chain issues, because I think that's a really interesting one as well. Again, right, you're sitting in Boxborough, you're seeing so many manufacturers on the day-to-day coming in, dealing with this time and time again. We've talked about it on this podcast before, right? I mean, as consumers, we're aware of supply chain issues, right? We're aware of supply chain shortages, things like that. And then you get into, okay, I'm a developer of a medical device and I'm looking for a specific component and I'm being told, okay, you're going to have to wait 52 weeks. You're going to have to wait, X number of amount to wait for these components. So what are you seeing, in the lab firsthand in regards to some of these component shortages, what manufacturers are doing to kind of get around that issue?
Sure. From our client standpoint, a lot of those shortages are causing clients to update their reports. And so it's causing an additional strain for the manufacturer because they just can't get the components. So sometimes, again, they're either going to find alternative components. Mm-hmm. Some of them that may be available may not have gone through their own individual certification process, just as you mentioned, because those component manufacturers have supply chain issues as well. So it becomes a compounding effect. Sometimes what we're finding is that they're forced to redesign products or say, we have to scrap this one or dump the whole product because it's just taking too long. And so there's product line managers where they're focused on what do we do? Do we focus on the next generation and scrap what we have? Or do we continue to try to find components to keep the product that we have on the market so we can continue to sell them? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes there might not be an alternative to a specific product that the market needs, that patients need, because it's different, right? It's not like a TV or a smartphone. Yes. These are devices, so they're faced with tough decisions, and so a lot of times they're really forced on making decisions. Do we just scrap it and start from new again? But even if we start from new, they're still going to have some of those tough decisions as far as finding these components. And so that's what they're doing. So a lot of times the clients are trying just to figure out, can we find alternative components? Where do we find them? Is there like components so we can keep the product on the market and make sure that they don't have a backlog as well? Because again, we're talking about life-saving type of devices that support people's health, mitigate pains, things of that nature. So they're trying to be creative, but they're struggling. And so what they're doing is they're looking for long-term partnerships throughout the supply chain, not just from a compliance standpoint, but again from a supply chain, design houses, things of that nature. So they're thinking of longevity. How can we make something viable today? And it's kind of forcing them to really look at sustainability, right? Yeah. It's looking at other areas as well. So they say, how can we make this and have a minimal impact on the environment, and to have the product on the market for a very long time so that we can continue producing these types of life-saving devices for these patients.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up, because I think one of the kind of unintended effects of the pandemic, right, was this, we're hearing a lot more now about sustainability because you're kind of being forced to think about that, right? Like you're being forced into this position of, okay, things aren't just as easily accessible as they used to be. I can't just get something right away when I want it, right? So now you're forced to look at things kind of in a different way about, okay, how can we make our supply chains more sustainable? How can we make what we're doing, more environmentally friendly going forward, as well as, addressing all of those concerns that you're talking about, right? Which is, at the end of the day, as medical device manufacturers, right, we're all just trying to get these products to the market as quickly as possible, right? To help patients, to help doctors, to help different people, in our communities. And so looking at that, okay, what's going to be the best option to move that forward and really, make sure you're in compliance and addressing all of the requirements, but not waiting 2 years to get components that you need, right? So looking at those kind of alternate measures, like you mentioned, right? Either working and sourcing different suppliers or deciding to, form partnerships with specific suppliers, or, which I think is another interesting point that you brought up too, right? Designing or developing your own subassemblies or components or whatever you might have to do in order to fit your device and, what your end goal is with your product, just to make sure you can get it to the market faster.
One thing that's interesting.
And I think too, one of the things that you had said too was talking about within those reports, putting in equivalencies, right? Saying that something is equal to that to make it easier on yourself as a manufacturer. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and what that means when we look at it from a third-party testing lab and we have reports and we list components. What do we mean when we say like listing something as an equivalency?
Sure. So when we talk about critical components on our reports, not to dive too deep into the details, but any component that's on the electrical circuit, we deem as a critical component because it's going to impact either the safety and the function of the device that could impact the patient and or the operator. So anything that falls in that path, that electrical path, it has to be certified because we have to make sure that that component does not fail. What happens is that if you can't get that specific component because of supply chain issues, they have to look for an alternative. What's an alternative? So they get it from manufacturer A. All right, can we get it from manufacturer B? But does it have the same specifications? Mm-hmm. Because if it does, if it's a one-to-one drop-in, it's a little bit easier from that standpoint. But if it's not, we have to maybe do some spot checking just to make sure that this alternative component keeps the product within compliance. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And it's one of those things where even if it's shaped differently, that could compromise the certification because you lose creepage and clearance on that specific board. And so sometimes if it's too big, right, then you say, all right, what do we do now? Well, let's redesign the board. And then once you start changing one thing, now you're changing another thing. And then now people are saying is, do we redesign the whole product now because we're having so many changes in this aspect? So that's what we mean by equivalence. And so it's hard to find because it's like, who has it? Because if you're making a competitive component or product, maybe your competitors already found that supplier as well. And so again, it's causing people to become creative and find different types of suppliers to make sure that they have a flush supply chain. The supply chain market, the sourcing people that we work with our clients, they're doing a tremendous job trying to find these things, trying to keep it out. But also too, there's the lead time, and so currently now, going back into the starting to going towards next year, 2023. Some of these manufacturers have found some of those components, and now they're bringing it back to us in a flurry, right? So now we found it, we have to get to market. So obviously, we have a schedule and dates that we like to hold for our clients, but they're coming back to us. So we have to be flexible to support these manufacturers in the same way to make sure that their products remain in compliance. One of the things that we're doing is we're looking at how do we review the critical components? What can we do to make it a little bit easier while maintaining our accreditation and meeting the requirements of the standard? So our certification department has worked with us as well, and they work with the manufacturer to say, okay, here's what we can do if you're looking for an alternative component, so they can have multiples in there. Sometimes they may be able to find these components, but they want to have multiple vendors because they're afraid if one of them is out of stock, it causes a problem. So there's flexible ways that they're going about it, but that's what we mean by the critical component, something that can be equivalent to maintain the safety and efficacy of that particular device.
And I think that's just a really good takeaway overall, right? And lessons learned that we've all had from the pandemic in general, right? Is some of this being more open to creativity, preparing in advance, really evaluating your supply chains and who you're using, looking for multiple vendors. And then, as you said, right, even looking so far as those reports, right, and making sure they're as open as possible, allowing more flexibility to swap things in and out, because we're really just in this, whole new era coming on the back end, if we can even say that, right, of the pandemic. I mean, who knows what's next, but if we can say, we're kind of moving into this new phase. And this level of kind of preparedness going forward, I think we'll just continue to see with our medical device manufacturers and as well as other manufacturers, right? Considering what they're doing when they're developing it and manufacturing products. So as we're, going into the end of this year, beginning of next year, are there any trends that you're seeing in the medical device space? Anything that you're seeing that's of interest to you that you think our listeners might want to look forward to?
Sure. So the trends are going back to the supply chain issues. You're finding crossover or collaborations with traditional medical device manufacturers and consumer products, right? And that opens up the home healthcare market. So you have devices. We'll take an easy one like tracking devices, smartwatches, Fitbits, things of that nature. But now you have more of these devices collaborating with the true medical device manufacturer, because those consumer devices, although they are not immune to the supply chain issues, but they have a market, and the device manufacturers like, hey, can we pair our technology with your hardware? And it opens up a new ecosystem, if you will. Yes, there's always been home healthcare type of devices. So for 60601-1-11, but now we're starting to see those type of things accelerate. Now you're starting to see, again, part of it is due to the pandemic, but you're starting to see people be more proactive as far as monitoring and doing diagnostics versus waiting for someone to be in a critical situation and having to go to the hospital. So you're seeing these companies, both consumer and medical, open up this new market. And also too, when you just look at the population, right, the consumer, patient or normal consumer, you're going into the millennials and younger generation where they accept the technology. So the acceleration is that type of home healthcare, smaller devices, and smart apps or tablets and things of that nature. So you're seeing the hardware still coming in, but you're seeing a lot of software in accessory devices starting to flood the market, which is very, very cool, because you have a lot more of like what we're doing now, this virtual. You have virtual doctor visits and things of that nature that are becoming more accurate. So that's one of the things that we see in the medical market here in the Boxborough.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think too, I could talk about this topic all day. I love it so much because it is just so fascinating to think, prior to the pandemic 5 years ago, right? The idea of talking to your doctor over FaceTime, over Zoom, having some sort of remote conversation, or getting a diagnosis or being told to administer a drug or treat yourself in a certain way, that would have just been unheard of, right? It's like, well, how could you possibly say that, that's an accurate diagnosis or an accurate treatment? And now, to your point, right, with these younger generations, millennials, younger, being so willing to accept technology and preferring it in many cases, right? Wanting to have this health at their fingertips, right? Everything's smart, an app that connects to your phone. You have, you're monitoring your insulin and you want to be able to look at it on an app and know exactly what your levels are. So if you need to take some sort of medication or if you need to adjust what you're eating, right? Everything is now going to move towards this idea of we like it smart, you want it fast, you want to know. And then couple that with everything from the pandemic and post-pandemic of people are wanting to take more control of their own healthcare, right? And they're wanting to monitor themselves on the front end, take better care of themselves, have those kind of health markers in order to prevent some of these, scary things from happening in the future. So I think that's such an interesting trend, and I'll be so excited to see where it goes over the next 5+ years, especially to your point too. And, we see this all the time of this convergence between consumer goods and medical products, companies that are traditionally in the IT consumer type space who now are deciding, okay, we're going to get into the medical space with home healthcare products or robotics, implantables. Now we're seeing all of the like AI and virtual reality stuff that's coming into play and how that kind of couples with medical technology. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time over the next couple of years. Like, of course, we have to get through all of the standard changes and the MDR and everything like that in addition to it. But seeing what's coming out, I just feel it's so powerful to be in our industry, be in the industry that we're in, because we get, this firsthand look at all of these amazing types of devices and technology and the things that manufacturers are coming up with on their own or together, partnering with universities, as you said, or companies partnering with each other. It's just a really exciting time to be in the medical space. Yeah. Well, Ray, this was such a good conversation. Any final thoughts, anything you want to leave our listeners with?
No, I mean it's I know it's a scary time out there as a patient, but I can assure you, the medical device industry, they're the best of the best, the brightest of the brightest, and they're trying to make sure that these products get to you as a patient in many forms. And we're just one of the facilities that helps get there. So we love what we do. We're passionate about what we do, and so we love the market and we love being here at Intertek.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Great ending note. So thank you so much, Ray, for joining me. If anyone out there has any questions, you can feel free to email me at any time, and we will look forward to you joining us on our next Medical Compliance with Clarissa. Thanks so much, guys.